We have two very big things coming up on the horizon. Obviously, everyone knows climate change and artificial intelligence. And then if you look around you and you see all the make work that exists in our culture, you might say, well, that's bad, that's wasteful. But it's not entirely. It's our government or our country, our nation looking after itself. Because if you have a bunch of people who are demoralized and depressed and dependent on the state, that's not good. They're not happy. In a lot of ways, we're only happy when we're doing one of two things. We're either happy because we're doing something useful, producing something, or because we're acquiring something. And you can, obviously family, I don't know if that really fits in, but those are two really big things. So where does that relate to AI and the change in the environment and the fact that government is going to make work for us? I've certainly, when I used to do software, I worked for a lot of companies that did absolutely nothing. And I figured that out at the time I was working for them, which wasn't great. I worked for companies that were pretending to do things so that we would look better to the Soviet Union, telling you my age a little bit, Star Wars, and that was a great bluff. I worked for companies that were doing stuff that only now we're trying to do, but they were big companies, and so 15 years ago they were trying to do it and it was pointless. They had a supercomputer of the time, which was probably less powerful than this phone right there. I've worked for companies that made their money entirely. Their secret sauce was that a certain military organization has to spend a certain amount of its budget on small companies. And so all they did was figure out how to get the phase ones and maybe the phase twos and get the money. And that never went anywhere. It was totally legal. It was a lot of really nice, smart people doing nothing useful. So what this might lead you to think is that if AI comes along and puts a lot of people out of work, we're going to have a lot of make work. And that's not a big deal, except that they're going to be consuming more. They might be consuming more. More might be available to consume. Think about Saudi Arabia right now. They are bonkers. You've seen it in the news. They're building ski slopes and the biggest mall in the world, and they are sort of saying, look, we can turn the desert or parts of the desert into a cool, comfortable place where you can buy Armani suits. That's not going to be so great environmentally. So I guess what I'm leading up to is, what are the ways, this is what we might think about, is what are the ways that all of these people can be tasked with something more productive? And why aren't more people working in certain fields? There are certain fields that would be brilliant to work on. That is to say, climate change, figuring out how to make more efficient cars, figuring out how to structure cities so you don't need a car, all of those good things. But then there's the cure for cancer and all that. I guess there's only so many people who can work on that. There's space exploration, all of those things. So we're going to find out what happens when AI comes along, puts a lot of people out of business, out of work. They need to have a life. They need to have skills they maintain. They need to consume things in greater and greater levels. At the same time, the climate is getting worse. There are a lot of ways this could work out well. There are some ways that it might not work out well. So it's going to be very interesting because people are going to spread out on a spectrum. There are going to be some people who say, okay, you know, AI can make things cheap. I'll just take what I'm given by the government or by my my right to live standard, my universal income, and have a good time and golf a lot and get really intense about that game, because people do. But there are going to be other people who are going to rebel against this. And that leads me, well, they're going to rebel against this and they're going to spread out on a spectrum. And that leads me to point out the other thing that happens, which is war. War is what we do when we don't have enough resources and when we have too many resources. So also people need to prove themselves by buying things or by doing things, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. So we're going to need to do things, and we're going to need to either figure out ways to do things that AI and robots can't do, or we're going to need to unionize in a scale that is amazing so that AI and robots are forbidden from doing things that we want to do. What do you think?